We're live.
Okay, welcome back, folks. This is Justice Oversight Committee. It is December 12th, and it is our afternoon meeting. And we're going to start with a discussion on Raise the Age report, which may touch a little bit on how we house some of the folks. That's going to transition into our 1:30 testimony as well. So we have with us the Commissioner of DCF, Commissioner Winters. We also have with us the Commissioner of BGS, Commissioner Fitch. I don't know if you both want to start up front together.
We can sit together and
let's do that.
And we also have Deputy Commissioner
Right.
Radke. I knew it would start with an R. So I don't know if the three of you want to be up there?
Sounds good.
How
Let's
does
do
that
that.
go?
Thank you.
Cozy, you like that?
We got plenty of chairs. Open up my legislative work.
Got mine on.
Can't open mine. Second. I have a few times. I'm trying to get to our legislative documents, but I can't open up my page. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Commissioner Winters, if you could introduce yourself for the record and begin talking about your report on Raise the Age.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Chris Winters, Commissioner of the Department for Children and Families. And as you stated earlier, I'm joined by Commissioner Fitch from Buildings and General Services and Deputy Commissioner Radke of the Family Services Division. We also have online Tyler Allen, and Erica, remind me of his exact title, please.
He's the Adolescent Services Unit Director.
Make sure we get that right. And Tyler can speak to some of the data and other information in the report if needed. And so I'll start out, very high level, that this report is our second report on the Raise the Age proposal. And it's organized into three sections. One section is DCF's existing system of care barriers and the high-end system of care expansion efforts. Another is an analysis of existing justice involved youth data. And thirdly, recommendations for what we believe needs to take place before the continued expansion of Raise the Age. And I'll start by saying that we hold the position, and we were somewhat unsure. We were waiting for the data. The last time we spoke to you, there were a series of 2 reports on Raise the Age. We were waiting for the data from the judiciary. We've now received that data and done some analysis. And we hold the position that a practice shift toward Raise the Age can only be successful in an environment that allows for youth needs to be fully met. And that trying to advance this practice while state and community systems are still at a dramatically reduced capacity would only undermine that initiative and undermine the overall system of care. Given Vermont's position of national leadership in expanding juvenile jurisdiction, it's much more important that we see that this is done well and that it has the resources that it needs to succeed. And we, of course, understand the urgency that lawmakers and others have had to realize that the final phase of the initiative. I'm sorry, let me start over on that piece. We understand the urgency that lawmakers and others have to get to the final phase of this initiative. But the Department for Children and Families really doesn't feel equipped to take on this additional workload until it has, at least to some degree, mitigated the crisis and that's currently affecting our capacity to serve all youth and families in our care. And I'll tell you that this has really been underscored recently. I just came back from Middlebury this morning, the 10th of 12 district office visits, where we're meeting with the Family Services Division and the Economic Services Division, and also the Office of Child Support folks that are in those some of those 12 districts. And it's driven home every single time what a crisis and what pressure these family service workers especially are under with the high-end staffings, with what is being asked of them above and beyond their normal duties. So included among these recommendations are things that we need to see, we believe we need in place before we add any more stress to that already stressed system. The 5 recommendations that are in the report represent the most essential elements that we identified to ensure our success. The recommendations, those 5 elements that are in the report, that we have an operating, the first is that we have an operating secure crisis stabilization program. And so at a minimum, that's the 4-bed temporary facility in Middlesex, and we'll get into that a little with Commissioner Fitch in a moment. Ideally, it would be a full operating secure campus. That's the permanent facility that we're moving toward as well, and we can discuss in a bit. So that's 1, an operating secure crisis stabilization program. 2, we believe we need additional juvenile services, more specifically, family service workers positions allocated to the Family Services Division workforce. And we're recommending expanding that workforce by at least 6 workers to take on the additional work that we believe would come with Raise the Age. And Tyler Allen can speak a little bit more to that data and how we came up with that number of positions. Thirdly, we would recommend an expansion of the current barge budget, the Balanced and Restorative Justice budget, to help offset some of the supervisory responsibilities for non-custodial probation of youth. And we recommend expanding that barge contract by $1 million annually to offset some of that. Fourthly, transition age specific residential program access. We have the Return House in Barry that is coming available to us. We recommend resourcing that Return House contract to develop a complete transition age youth residential treatment program. That's a 10-bed capacity. And lastly, we recommend committed ongoing financial support for a comprehensive child welfare information system, CCWIS system. The development of that system is a long-term need, as you've all heard about, I'm sure. And DCF wouldn't anticipate delaying Raise the Age until that full project is complete, but we do need to make sure we're funding the system. We have a partial funding for that. We're moving forward on an RFP. We don't yet know the exact cost. The RFP is close to closing on that. But we really need that system. It's necessary to maintaining accurate records and any significant analysis of performance outcomes that comes with Raise the Age. So that's very high level of the Raise the Age report and our recommendations. We're happy to dive in on further analysis within the high-end system of care. I don't know if you want to get into that now or when we speak next about the RFP, including EGS efforts. But generally speaking, we know that that one of the limiting factors in the growth of the system of care is that even where staffing is increasing, the acuity of the youth in our custody is increasingly complex. The need is higher, and that drives the number of truly available beds that we have in our community down. And of course, Deputy Commissioner Radke can speak to, the shuffling that we have to do within the system right now in order to maintain youth in appropriate settings that displaces other youth and limits the number of beds that are truly available. So we're very worried about the overall state of the system of care and recommend at this time not moving forward with Raise the Age until some other pieces of the puzzle are in place.
So Commissioner, you had 5 recommendations. Are they laid out in priorities? The priority, or is it that doesn't matter? They're just kind of all equal.
When I look at this list, and I'll let Deputy Commissioner and perhaps Tyler Allen as well weigh in, number 1 is number 1 in my view. And number 5, the CWIS system, it's really an important piece, but more of a side note to some of the other pieces here. I don't know if Erica, if you'd like to weigh in any more on that.
Hello, members of the committee. I'm Erica Radke, for the record, Commissioner of the Family Services Division. And I would agree with Commissioner Winters in terms of number 1, the getting a secure price stabilization program up and running would be our number 1 priority. and that the CWIS system is necessary, but not necessary to go ahead and move forward, but raise the age, that it would certainly help us in having a smoother implementation. But then I would look at 2, 3, and 4 as being all pretty much equal in terms of importance.
Questions? Teresa and Jenny.
Thank you. You might be surprised, but I agree with everything that you said so far. Having some insight into the status of the way things are right now, it would be, in my estimation, it's my personal opinion, foolish for us to press that at this particular moment in time. Not giving up on the policy, just saying that I agree that we need to have some things in place before we look at that. So my question is that you laid out the priorities, you spoke to a potential RFP. So I have two questions. One is specifically related to the programs that are supposed to be coming online between, January, February. There's nobody to run them right now unless that's changed since you wrote the report. So an update on that, if you would. And then do we expect to see these things in the governor's budget? I hope I'll be able to ask that question. I know I may not get an answer, but I'm they're your recommendations. And so those are my two questions.
I can speak to staffing first, the easier one, although it's not that easy. We are cautiously optimistic about having staffing for the Middlesex facility. We have nothing signed. But we've been trying very hard to get a staffing and a provider for that facility, and there's something in the works.
Okay.
We're hopeful there. And then regarding the budget, I think that's still, there are many pieces to the budget that are still in flux. Housing being one of them. That's very important and very all-consuming in a lot of ways as a priority for the state. So that piece of the budget is still moving. So these things, the governor's obviously aware of these recommendations from this report, but I can't tell you at this time whether that's any of those are appearing in the budget yet.
So the reason that I asked Commissioner Winters is that, sort of one thing for us to make recommendations in legislation and put out as priorities, and then the governor to come back and say, well, maybe we didn't get them funded, but what I'm seeing is the administration putting forward the things that need to happen. And so I just feel compelled to say that it is then incumbent upon the administration to present the resources, a plan for the resources that are necessary. So thank you so much. And I'm glad to hear that there's some potential light for the Middlesex facility. Is there a plan B if that doesn't come to fruition?
And C and Plan D.
D,
Plan
okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
That would be for the staffing only,
For staffing.
Yeah,
correct.
just to be clear.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Senator Sears, and then we'll go to Senator Lyons. Dick?
Yeah, I first of all, I want to emphasize that I don't blame the current commissioner of DCF or the staff there for this, but frankly, I'm disappointed. We passed a law. It wasn't a proposal. It's the law that 19-year-olds would become juvenile offenders back in, I believe it was 2019, but I could be mistaken. And it was supposed to happen in 2020. For a number of reasons, the legislature has extended that, I believe, 3 times because of the pandemic, because of the crisis that we have recognized DCF is facing, and for other reasons. To now say that it would be up to the administration to have a plan in place and to provide even one more year before this change takes place, to me indicates that it's not going to happen. It'll never happen if we give you that. So that if you're putting a plan in place and it's not in the 2025 budget to implement this, frankly, I don't think it's ever going to happen. So I'm frustrated by this. I remain committed. When we passed this law, there were good reasons for it. We expected the administration that signed the law to support the effort. And frankly, it hasn't happened yet. The 18-year-olds are currently being served. I understand the problem. I understand the frustrations. And I understand that you have a system that is not able to respond to even current people within your purview because of the lack of a secure facility. So I just want to say that if we do nothing, it becomes the law once the current exemption is lifted on July 1, 2024. So it would take a legislative action to extend the deadline even further. I believe that generally will require some kind of action. I believe last year we put it in the miscellaneous judiciary bill or in the appropriations bill. I can't remember where. But we did extend it another year to July 1, 2024. And now we're being asked to extend it indefinitely, but not being assured that the money that it would take to do it right will be in the governor's 2025 budget. That's extremely disappointing, which indicates if you don't put it in the budget, it indicates it's not a priority. So those are comments, and I fully recognize. I've spent time down on Depot Street, talking to the administrators there, talking to some of the staff there about what they're dealing with. It's called See All Inc. I've also spent time talking with some of the folks from the VPI program. So I'm fully familiar of the impact of not having a secure detention facilities had on Vermont DCF and its ability to handle some of the most difficult cases. But again, you were handed this problem. You didn't sign. I don't know if you signed up for this problem, but I know you're dealing with an awful lot of crises, and not the least of which is economic services and the housing crisis as well. But I do have to put that on the record. So we'll see what the legislature does in 2024.
Okay. So, yes, the budget question was top of my mind, and any thoughts on the BAA, given that this is an ongoing issue and something that could be reinforced probably quickly. You can't answer that, I'm sure, but I've heard a little bit from you about whether it'll be in the budget or not.
Yeah, that's right, Senator. I'm happy to take this back as part of our ongoing budget discussions. I will say that the Middlesex facility is funded, fully funded. The 6 positions we have not, that is not funded at this time. The barge additional $1 million was something that we have been looking at as something to expand, but I don't believe it's in the current budget yet. I don't know if Erica or Tyler can speak to the return house cost. And then I would just say that the child welfare information system, we do have some carry forward and enough to go through with the RFP process and start to explore the first module of CWIS. So some of these items are funded in the budget, but certainly not all of them, but it's still under discussion.
All right, thank you. So I want to make sure that it can be sustainable.
going forward. We have what we need. The other question I have is I noticed in the report that there are 87 folks who are charged with misdemeanors. And I don't know what the age group is there, or what the distribution is by age. I'm wondering what efforts are in place to keep them from going further. So if you have a misdemeanor, seeing maybe lower levels of restorative justice, what's going on with those kids? And if they are kids in middle school or high school, are we linking in with CSAC, the school counseling programs? Is there anything going on there? Because I have been talking with some of the local school counselors and some in the Middlebury area, and also with the Middlebury office. I agree, it's good. They're just overworked. Yeah, but so just any thoughts on what's happening? What age group are we looking at with those misdemeanors? And is there any linkages between the counseling that goes on with Family Service Division and the extended CSAC program, school program?
Oh, I'd like Tyler Allen, if you could speak to that, please.
Happy to. Thank you so much. My name is Tyler, for the committee, my name is Tyler Allen. I'm the Adolescent Services Director for the Family Services Division. It is a pleasure to be amongst you virtually here today. And thank you for that question. I just want to clarify the court filings data that we're referring to in this report is not concretely a number of individuals. These are filings. So there could be, it's not saying there's 87, but there are 87 distinct filings. There is a limitation in this data in that I don't know who all these people are, but these are 19-year-olds that in the past year who received filings. So all those 298 filings all happened in the adult criminal system. So they're not in the DCF system. So I can't speak to what their situation was in all accounts. Some of them might still have involvement with high school or educational schools, but they would be currently getting adult charges. And so the attempt that we're trying to do with this piece of data was to say, if we were to have raised the age last year, these 298 new cases potentially could have come to DCF. And of those 298, which ones of those would have actually turned into action on the DCF front? And so I tried to extract the ones that wouldn't have come our way. They had Big 12 offenses, or they already were somehow being addressed by this youthful offender status, something along those lines. So of the 87 misdemeanors, there's a chance that there's a likelihood that many of them were diverted. There's a likelihood that some of them might have had charges dropped at some point along the way. Some of them might have had a fine applied to them or some kind of lesser sentence. But the idea of this would all be new introduced workload to DCF had we raised the age earlier. So the data is imperfect for our purposes, and it is not all of, it's not DCF data, so I can't speak to what happened with those individual kiddos.
Thank you. And so it suggests some data, something, how to improve that data collection. IT is a problem across the board. We understand that. But thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome. And if I could add just one more thought on the top of that, I think that's part of the connection to that final request for a CWIS system. Right.
Just a further clarification of that data. So it says 109 newly originating in family court. Is that youthful offender status? Those cases were brought directly in. Could you explain what those 109 are?
So that is the 87 plus the 22. That would be 109 of those filings would have gone directly into Family Services Division or into our purview, as opposed to going through the the adult criminal court system.
And that is if we had raised the age to 19.
Last year, correct.
Which we did not do.
Okay, so that wasn't youthful offender status.
No, youthful offender status you'll see up there was 83. those were cases that were filed directly to youthful offender status. Now, there is some possibility that youthful offender status came in at a later date, somewhere around there. What we would need to use is court dispositional data in order to say, how did this, what came out at the end of the legal process? But then, of course, the limitation to looking at that data set for this current time frame is that it takes a long time for disposition to occur. So we wouldn't see how it all ended. So that's why I said there's some limitations to the data, but it gives us a picture of this would all be new work coming into the division.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions? Lisa?
Deputy Commissioner, this is probably for you, I guess. When we look at the chart in the report that, speaks to the level of care and the pre and post pandemic capacities, if you were feeling optimistic, where do you think that we could be a year from now? In terms of additional capacity, not in any one of these, but sort of in total.
It's hard because every time we think we're getting a toehold on getting increased percentage, something will happen, a program will close or have to reduce the workers. They don't get enough workers in order to have be able to serve as many youth as we would like. So we're running at about 55% of previously contracted capacity now. If I were feeling optimistic, I would boost that to perhaps 65%, thinking we would have our 4 secure beds online and hopefully some of the other, and then also the Wyndham beds, we might have those online and perhaps increase some of the capacity in our other residential programs. So to be optimistic, I would say additional 10%. But even as the commissioner mentioned, it's not even just the number of beds, because with our youth with higher acuity, we have youth now that may come in 1 kiddo, but we're paying for basically 3 beds because we need that many staff to stay with that youth. And we have 4 kiddos coming back from Florida from a PRTF where they're going to require a similar level of care. So you have the beds, but you can't put any additional kiddos in those beds because the staff is supporting certain youth. So even optimistically, I'm thinking 10%. I hope I'm wrong. And we get 20%, but that's where I'm thinking.
Okay, thank you. And then with regard to how are you referring to this acronym, CWIS or?
Yes.
That's a new one. That's a new one. So you issued an RFP or about to issue an RFP. So is this on the priority list for ADS?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good. Wouldn't help to issue an RFP if.
They have been working really closely with us, and we're hoping to get the feds are looking at the RFP and making their edits and their changes. And when they send it back, it'll have its internal review process. So we're hoping to get it posted soon.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Raise the Age itself before we get into, because this is going to segue not only into the Middlesex facility, but also establishing a permanent secure facility. So I want to make sure, you're fine. I want to make sure that we've gotten the questions asked and answered about the Raise the Age and the report and the recommendations of Raise the Age.
Essentially, we have to act as a body if we decide to.
Right. Regardless of the governor's recommend in this budget or lack thereof. Anything else? So let's transition to part of the discussion that occurred in Raise the Age was the Middlesex facility. And if you remember, there were for the secure residential, for the mental health department, and for our folks in the mental health system, we had about 6 to 8 beds in mobile units in the trailers up at the Middlesex site. Those had closed because we have built a new secure 16-bed secure residential mental health facility in Essex, which was the former Woodside site, not the building, because the building got demolished for the most part, rebuilt. So we have those temporary trailers that were due to be taken off site that is now being proposed for 4 beds for youth as a temporary facility until the permanent secure facility is up and running. So Commissioner Fitch is the one that's working on hardening these trailers. And the last time we were here, the cost was between $500,000 and $1 million to do this. And I asked the question, where's the money coming from to do the renovations? And I still had that question. I want to make sure we have the full answer on that. And how are the renovations coming, and when's the proposed date that the building will be ready? And then on the staff.
So for the record, Madam Chair, my name is Jennifer Fitch, and I am the Commissioner of the Department of Buildings and General Services. As I said, the last time I was here, all state facilities fall underneath the BGS jurisdiction of the BGS Commissioner, and that includes both leased space and state-owned space as well, including the State House, which we're in today. So as an update, you are correct. It's a 4-bed temporary secure, physically secure building. We will have up to 4 beds available, and it's actually progressing very well. And we plan to have, be prepared for occupancy in terms of the building by the end of January. And we are right on target and on schedule to do so.
And what's the cost?
And the cost is still somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million, and that's because there's contingency built in, Madam Chair. Contingency means you find something that you weren't anticipating, right? Anytime you open up a hole in your wall, happened in my house, you find something that you weren't expecting. And so you want to make sure you've got contingency built in so that if you do find something you weren't planning on, confronting, that you have funding while you're there to fix or repair, whatever the case may be. So that's why we're saying it's between $500,000 and $1 million. There's basically about $400,000 built in for contingency. If we don't need it, then we won't spend it. And that's basically how contingency works.
And that's coming out of the DCF budget?
Correct.
Questions?
End of January, doesn't include staffing.
I would leave that question to Commissioner Winters.
That's right. Yeah.
And if we don't have staffing, then what?
If we don't have staffing, then we would go to looking to staff perhaps with our specialized response team that we're trying to get up and running. We would need to look at my staff to staff as well. And we do have some contracts with TLC, and we have one person that's just helping out with staffing, and we look for them to continue to boost up the contract with us as well. But that's absolutely not an ideal position. It's definitely taking a toll on the team. That's why we're really pushing to try to find staffing through a program, a vendor.
I guess my question is recognizing because we've heard from the SEA, we've heard from you folks, I've heard from employees directly about the stress of staffing these situations and the immense amount of toll that it's taking on the folks in your division, Deputy Commissioner, and other people across AHS. So I guess my question is the department prepared if Plan A and a private provider is, you don't seal the deal on that, will you be prepared to move to request additional positions to cover this facility? I'll just be blunt, covering it with existing staff, even on a short-term basis, does not seem to be a realistic proposal. So will you be prepared to tell us what the anticipated cost and how many positions might be required if your negotiations don't result in a contract for providing that service.
We can certainly do the analysis on the number of positions needed and the cost and have that available to you.
Thank you.
Sorry if this was already addressed, but are you looking at the costs and barriers of citing a facility and putting in a recommendation around any local or state permit reform?
Yes, thank you for asking. It is part
Favorite
of
subject.
housing and regulatory reform, and I think will be a part of the what Commissioner Farrell will be presenting.
Okay. And it helps to have the analysis of all the costs of delay. I can't even quantify the human cost of kids being in adult facilities. But, you know, it really helps paint a picture that it's not just a paper pushing process, that this impacts many lives.
Really appreciate that, Senator, and it in some ways segues into the RFP process that we're going through now, where we're using weighted criteria, including permitting. It's definitely a huge consideration when you're looking at a couple of bids. What sort of barriers are there? And we've run into it again and again in areas of the state trying to site state facilities.
Any other questions before we move on to how we're progressing going into a secure juvenile facility?
I have,
Done.
Madam.
Yes, Topper.
We just heard that if they are unable to get the staff, that some existing contracts that they have now, they might be able to utilize those staff. One of them, I thought I heard TLC. Is that tender loving care?
I believe it is.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said.
I believe it is. It's the TLC is a staffing firm that we've been using in the past to have when we needed to fill in gaps with our staffing of our juveniles.
Okay, so under TLC, they have people that are capable of dealing with these people?
Yes, absolutely. And people that are used to dealing with juveniles and coming in and assisting with our staff when we are at the alternative locations.
Okay. Now, one more question. Is this the same organization that's located, their main office is in Barry, Vermont?
I'm not sure. I thought the main office was in Burlington, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Thank you.
TLC.
We could follow up with you, Representative McFawn, and let you know where they're based.
Senator Sears?
Yeah, I did. This is kind of going backwards to the prior topic of raise the age, but I just looked back at the law that we passed in 2018. It was Act 201 of 2018. There we provided for, in 2020, those 18-year-olds would come under DCF, and then 19-year-olds in 2022. But there was a report required within 201, Act 201 of 2018, and I wonder if Ben can find that report. It was a report from the Department of Children and Families in consultation with the state's attorneys, Defender General, Court Administrator, and the Commissioner of Corrections. And I'm going to read a little bit of that because I think it's important in our conversation today. Consider the report shall consider the implications, including necessary funding, but expanding juvenile jurisdiction under 33 VSA Chapter 52 to encompass persons 18 and 19 year age, beginning in fiscal year 2021. On or before November 1st, 2018, the report to the Joint Legislative Justice Oversight Committees and the Joint Legislative Child Protection Oversight Committees on the status and plan for expansion, including necessary funding, measures necessary to avoid a negative impact on the state's child protection response, and specific milestones related to operations and policies, including identification and of a timeline for structured and systematic changes within the juvenile justice system for the Family Division, the Department of Children and Families, Department of Corrections, State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, and the Office of Defender General. An operation and business plans that defines benchmarks, including possible changes to resource allocation, clearly defined path for geographic consistency and COD alternatives, provide status updates, reports to the two committees on or before November 1, 2019, November 1, 2020, and November 1, 2021. I could go on, but it seems to me that what we're being asked to do now is what we asked the Department of Children and Families to do along with the other in 2018. So I'd like to see those reports, see the milestones, and understand better what happened for the upcoming session. I think, being asked now to do what we asked the department to do in 2018, and I realize none of the people in front of us were here in 2018 in this position. They were in Vermont. Some of them were in Vermont. I think maybe we fell down on the job, but I think the administration did as well. All the things that you're asking us to do now were asked in 2018.
Madam Chair, if I could just respond briefly to that. And I appreciate the senator's comment, and being fairly new to this, I'm speaking to it from what I've learned from staff, what I've learned from reading some of those reports, and just what I know, which is that we've been through a lot since 2018, and our workforce and our system of care are significantly diminished. Our workforce is burnt out. We have a lot of people leaving as family services workers. So I think we're in a much different situation than we were in 2018. And I think a lot of best laid plans in 2018 and 2019 went sideways when 2020 rolled around. And we're doing our best to rebuild that system of care and get back to a place where we could focus on something like raise the age and doing something that's somewhat innovative in the country. But at this moment, we really are advising a whole lot of caution before we add any other strains to our devastated workforce and system of care.
Anything else on the raise the age piece?
I would just like to add, along with the commissioner, in terms of reemphasizing our commitment to raise the age. It is important to us. This when I heard about when I first started, how Vermont was really taking the lead in doing this type of progressive initiative. It's our division still is very dedicated to it, but it's critical to us that we're doing it well. We're doing it right. This time, I don't see, given the state of our system of care, our issues with the computers and our workforce, that we would be able to do so without the things outlined in the report. But our commitment absolutely remains steadfast to it.
So as a segue from the report, you had 5 recommendations, and your priority 1 recommendation was physically secure. So we're addressing that in a temporary situation with the 4 beds at the Middlesex facility. But at the same time, we're looking at trying to find land, a building for a permanent secure facility. And in last year's capital bill, It was $1 million that the administration requested that we put in for Agency of Human Services and BGS to go out and look for land, look for space for a facility that, in terms of the testimony that was received, was a facility that would be an acute stabilization facility with some step-down beds available within the facility as well. And back this summer and fall, the request for qualifications that BGS put out. And then as a result of that, there were RFPs that were put out, that was put out in the fall. And those have come back in the middle of November. So I'd like an update in terms of where BGS is right now with this, and also where DCF is in terms of the future and what you're looking at in a secure facility.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a quick update is that it is progressing nicely. You did a great overview. So traditionally, I said this the last time, right? We would go through the capital process. We would bank the money over time because these facilities tend to be more expensive. And it would take us about 3 to 5 years to deliver a facility. Recognizing that we need to move more quickly than 3 to 5 years, we're using an alternative method where instead of, again, going through the capital bill, we're doing basically a design build, which means we're going to work with the developer to build something that meets the programmatic needs of DCF. And then we're going to do a lease back. So we're going to lease the facility rather than owning a facility. Again, if we had gone through the capital bill and done a standard design bid build. However, in the RFP, it talks about a requirement for the state to be able to purchase that facility that we're leasing at some point in time. So there will be opportunities for the state if they'd like to purchase it and it become a state-owned facility at some point in time down the road. So we have, we put out the request for qualifications. We had 3 developers that were interested in bidding. The RFP went out, as you said, Madam Chair, all 3 developers did bid, which is great. That's wonderful to hear. And now we are in the selection process. So we have makeup on the selection committee of members from DCF and BGS. We are still going through that selection process, but it is our goal and our desire to have selected a developer by the end of this year and to begin design beginning of next year and to have a facility up and running within the 2-year timeframe. Now, I want to caveat that with something that you said. So we call it not in my backyard. And that is, everybody understands that we need a facility and that it's critical and that we need to take care of the children of Vermont. And we all have an obligation to do so. I will tell you though, however, that because of our permitting process, it only takes one. It only takes one person. And it can significantly slow down and delay the process of delivering a building. So we will be leaning on everybody to help us bring that building forward. So hopefully legislative leadership, community leadership, anyone that we can get to help support us moving forward through that permitting process will be critical to meeting that 2-year timeframe.
Can you explain this one person veto thing?
Act 250. So anytime you go through Act 250, it only takes one person to come to an Act 250 meeting to say, I have concerns and these are my concerns, and it can completely gridlock the process.
But doesn't that person have to have some standing to do so? I mean, they have to have adjoining property. I mean,
Usually
Particularized interest. You
right,
have to have a particularized interest for you to.
right. But that's been, I mean, it can't just be anybody.
So Madam Chair, I don't want to stick this back on Madam Chair because that's not fair to her. But I wasn't here at the time. But Madam Chair was very influential in our ability at BGS to be able to deliver a correctional facility in Springfield. So obviously it was the 2 commissioners at the time, but Chair Emmons was there helping support BGS and DOC at the time, which helped us deliver that project. So I will just tell you, when you look at places like Newberry, right? That's exactly what we're talking about. So it will require a lot of support from everybody here, as much support as we can get to help us move that project forward.
So if we, if we did go forward in a design build where the developer owns the building, we would lease that back, which comes out of the appropriations. That will come out of our general fund budget, pay for that. Normally, when we get involved in building or construction to provide state services for folks who are institutionalized under the state, it goes through the capital build process, which we then have oversight of those construction documents, how we move forward, the price, the cost. Who would have on the legislative end the oversight if it's a design build? Because the money is not coming out of our capital budget, and it's not directly coming out of our appropriations committee until the lease payments are due. So where's the legislative oversight?
I don't know the answer.
I don't have a direct answer for that either, Madam Chair. I will swing back to Commissioner Winters. So I do know there was a requirement to engage with stakeholders in this process. And I believe that process has started. We talked about that the last time we were here.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to talk about that right now, but Deputy Commissioner Radke and Tyler Allen as well are convening stakeholder meetings around a new facility, which includes people with lived experience, which I think includes some legislators, but maybe Tyler could speak to that group and what their work has been so far.
Thank you. There was a stakeholder group that's convened. I believe it's called the Facility Planning for Justice Involved Youth Stakeholder Advisory Group. I can't remember it exactly, but it is a group that we pulled together. We've met twice so far. Our next meeting is set to occur this Friday. But we're still trying to identify more people that maybe should be in that group. And we begin kind of consultation with the group around what our plan is, getting everybody up to speed on this is what we have been doing. People have voiced their concerns and their thoughts. Two topics of interest at this point are the size of the long-term facility moving forward and what the therapeutic modalities employed in those facilities are. So those are the level of discussions we've had to date. We are also using that group to help inform state plan that should be coming back to the legislators this January about disparate impact of individuals who are going through that. And so I think there's going to be there's a number of stakeholder kind of informational gathering, kind of sharing opportunities. I think there also should be a tie-in between the Racial Disparities Advisory Panel, the RDAP is known to some of the folks in this room. Around that, I think there should be a connection in there as well as other state office connections. So yeah, I guess that's what I can say at this point as to how we've been engaging that stakeholder process.
And I would like to add that I've attended the second meeting, and it's been really robust conversation. And in terms of oversight, as far as programming, there have been a lot of difficult questions and a lot of interest in making sure that this program is a definite departure of what had gone on in the past. And not only are there individuals with lived experience, but DMH has been at the table, and we really had a lot of, and court, the Attorney General's office, the Office of Child, Youth, and Family Advocate. So there are a lot of people there that are making sure that their voices are heard to make sure that the programming is solid and trauma-informed, all the things that are important to us as well.
So I hope that there's not a disconnect between the stakeholders group and the internal workings of DCF in terms of what you want programmatically. The building has to reflect this. And that's where my oversight question comes in. If it's a lease, if it's a design build where we lease, who really has the oversight of that developer?
So I can answer a couple of things, and I wanted to add one point. So we had BGS and I talked about this last time, we're changing the nature of the buildings, right? Before they were very institutional, how do I describe it? Kind of darker feeling, very noisy, very institutionalized. If you go to any of our correctional facilities today, that's basically what Woodside used to look like, right? Before it was raised and demolished. Today, we're changing the way in which we design these facilities. We used to call it trauma informed as well as gender informed. Last year in the Capitol bill, your committee, Madam Chair, used the term evidence-based design. And that means that we are learning from people around us that are advancing these types of facilities, and we're learning from them about what is working well in terms of rehabilitating these populations and bringing those into the designs that we are now providing to, again, these what I like to call the 24/7 facilities. And that means they are more open, they're more spacious, there's a connection with nature, they're lighter, they're brighter, sound is dampened, so it's quieter. And so we're bringing all of those elements into these new builds, and evidence has shown that they are really great for restorative environment for the people that are there. For anybody that's had a chance to go to the new Essex Mental Health Care Facility, which is River Valley Therapeutic Center, you'll find that exactly kind of how we're moving forward is reflected in that build. BCPH is similar. I would say it's a little older, but kind of you can see that advance over time. And we're taking those same principles as you put into the capital bill last year and incorporating them into the planning and programming for this permanent facility as well. So in terms of oversight, it's a good question. What I would say is we are definitely taking to heart everything that you put into the capital bill and making sure that we're incorporating those elements into this bill as well. We even have, as a requirement for the RFP, the developer even had to provide someone where this is their background, an architect where this is their background. So again, we're bringing in that specialty architect, again, to bring in these elements into the build, the design of the build. In terms of oversight for the facility itself, BGS will be providing that oversight, so we will continue to act like a project manager, just as we do on every single build. You are very familiar, Madam Chair, with Sabrina Karish, who is the project manager that led the new mental health care facility in Essex. She will also be the project manager for this as well. So we will continue to have, just like we do in a normal build, we will continue to have design meetings where we're bringing in DCF and BGS. We'll be bringing in what we're learning from the stakeholders into those meetings as well. And we'll be incorporating all of those elements into what will be the final design for the facility. We call it design build because while we're designing it, we'll be able to build some elements. So for example, once the foundation has been designed, that can go in while you're still designing some of the internal elements of the facility. That allows us to basically build that facility much more quickly than we go through the full design cycle and then we go through the full build cycle. Basically, you're kind of overlapping some of those steps to, again, truncate the timeline because we recognize we need to deliver this facility as quickly as possible. And I assumed, Madam Chair, but maybe incorrectly, that we would still be testifying in HCI and SI on this facility as well, and that we would be providing you with whatever plans we have at the time. And we would, I assumed, be getting some feedback from both of those committees as well. And I know there's additional committees too, that I assume that we will be getting feedback from as well.
Yeah, so when you're at the point where you've decided on where the facility is going to be, I mean, if you can make sure you reach out to representatives and senators who can start working with you to support that decision, because at least the folks in this room, I think, are very, very much wanting to see that happen as soon as possible. And if you could please do that.
Absolutely.
Any support is amazing. I always ask whenever I'm testifying on these types of facilities, and we really appreciate it. And I've gotten a lot of lessons learned again from Madam Chair. So taking all of that in and trying to incorporate those lessons learned as we move forward.
Senator Sears.
I think I'd like to follow up on what Martin just pointed out. I think it's critical we should learn from Newberry and the experience there. And I have always faulted Beckett back here in Bennington with the number of group homes they have, not working with members of the community. And I think it's going to be, I don't quite understand the relationship between the developer and who's going to operate the programs, but it's critical that not only do they work with legislators, and I'm certainly willing to help if it's in this area, but also with community leaders and community members. That certainly, if we've learned anything, once we had legislators opposed to the Newberry facility, I think that really created a additional hurdle. Now we're in the environmental court, and I think we as a state are moving away from that facility, but it hasn't been decided yet, and we have to wait for the court decision. But I think if we learn anything, it's important that we begin working with the communities long before any shovels are put in the ground or any agreements are reached. And I know it's difficult, but it's so critical that you have the community support. I know there is a meeting shortly in Bennington regarding the reuse of the of one of the nursing homes in Bennington for different populations. And that anything that comes state down is going to result in some resistance, and so it's critically important.
True, how true, how true. So what is the timeline for the secure facility to be up and running? As the design build, you said it's truncated. So instead of 3 to 5 years, what are we talking?
We're really hoping to get it done in 2 years, and we're hoping to advance in the design. So right now we finished planning and programming, right? We needed that in order to put the RFP out so that the
You've got planning and programming, that's in the BGS,
That's
not
right.
the DCF programming.
That's right. So that's laying out what your facility looks like, the different rooms, those kinds of things, right? Something for a developer to respond to and give us a cost proposal on. And so that's sort of the very initial planning part of a project. Once we award the project, then we will move into conceptual design / schematic design, and really start that design process in earnest. We have to get so far through that process in order to be able to start the permitting process, because you have to have a certain amount of design plans in order to present them for permitting. So we'll have to do that. The hope is to get it all done in 24 months. And that means we've got a lot of work to do in a short time period, which again is why I'm saying community engagement and permitting piece is so critical, because that 2-year time frame is basically built on the fact that things are going to go smoothly. And so right now the goal is to be able to occupy the facility January 1st of 2026. That is an aggressive timeline though, so I just want to be really clear with everybody about that.
And then once that facility gets built and operating and open, then you'll close the Middlesex 4 beds. That's the plan.
That's the plan.
That's the plan.
So the new secure facility that is facility secured would not be owned by the state. Thinking is we would not own it. We'd pay a lease payment to it with the thinking we own it at the end. It could be 20 years, 25 years, whatever's negotiated. And then the staffing of this facility would also be contracted out, is the thinking, correct?
That's correct.
Has that decision been made in terms of contracting out?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, that's one of the most significant lessons we could take away from Woodside, was that it should not be a state facility, that it should have a third party, that we should be oversight. The regulator should not also be the provider. So there is significantly strong opinion within AHS right now that it should be a third party provider with experience, who's experienced with trauma-informed care and uses a therapeutic approach. There's a number of providers out there that I think will be interested in a brand new facility and a program like this. We think our chances are very good of attracting a trusted partner, an experienced provider there in a new facility.
And whether the facility is leased or owned, it still falls underneath jurisdictional BGS commissioner. That means we still have oversight of that facility in terms of the building components and things like snow removal and trash removal and custodial, all of the things basically to run it from an operations and maintenance standpoint of the facility itself. Still falls underneath the jurisdiction of the BGS commissioner. There will still be a lease agreement that lays out all of the terms. If for some reason they didn't uphold some term in that lease agreement, right? We have the opportunity to basically say to the developer, hey, you're not meeting your obligation here in the lease agreement. And we have those conversations in lease spaces where we may have a challenge. Maybe there's some water damage that hasn't been addressed in the facility, that kind of thing, right? When we understand and know that those things happen, we then reach out to the landlord and we talk about, okay, this is what's required to make the repairs for the lease agreement. So we still have control over that space is the message I'm trying to send.
So we do have a question. Topper?
Thank you. Just so that I understand exactly what we're doing here. We are building the building, is that correct?
A developer will be building the building.
Okay, we're paying for the building then. Is that correct?
We are paying through the building basically through a leaseback situation.
So Topper, there is no money laid out from the capital bill or from the general fund to build the building. If we were going to build this building, we would be talking 25, 30 million.
I think that's in the right ballpark, Madam Chair.
But because we're working with a developer to build that building, the developer is going to own that building. They will put the money up front, and then we're going to pay a lease payment to that developer, a negotiated lease payment. So we won't own the building.
Madam Chair, I also heard, I thought that there would be an opportunity to buy the building later on.
And that's correct. That's correct. And that would be negotiated when you negotiate those lease payments, because maybe a portion of those lease payments would go towards the ultimate cost of that building. We don't know. That's up to negotiations with BGS and the developer. The issue is when we do it this way, it shifts where the money is coming from. If we were to build it, it comes up front from the capital bill where we bond for the money. If you do it through lease payments and you eventually own that building at the end of 20 years or 30 years, whatever is negotiated, those lease payments, the rent is paid out of the appropriations bill. It's paid out of the general fund.
Yeah, and at that juncture, probably the building's going to need to be renovated 20 years out. My other question is, who's going to be liable if anything goes awry? If, like some of the questions they had in Middlebury about police protection, and not Middlebury, but Newbury, about police protection and things like that. Who's going to be liable if something happens? The state of Vermont or the person who built the building and is in that building, the services are being provided to the youth? Who will be liable if something goes awry and there's a problem in wherever the building's going to be?
So if it's a building related issue, let's say we have a flood. And all of a sudden, right, we need to do something I know I'm just using that because it's very close to home here in the Montpelier complex, right? Then it would be the BGS commissioner and staff within BGS that would address that issue because it's a building related issue. And so all of those terms get negotiated through the lease agreement. This will be a very lengthy lease agreement. There's going to be a lot of requirements in that lease agreement. If the landlord does not adhere to the requirements within the lease, then the state has the right to litigate against that developer. Now, here's the thing. The 3 developers that have bid on the permanent facility are all very passionate and care very much and want to be part of a solution. So that means to me, I don't anticipate that there's going to be any problems in terms of our ability from an operations and maintenance standpoint to work with the developer. Now, could it happen? It's possible. And if they violate something in the lease agreement, then we have the right to litigate. I would hope that we would never get to that point and that we would have a very collaborative, supportive relationship, because in all three proposals, again, that's the feeling that you get from them. They want to be part of the solution. They want to help.
So to follow up in terms of the operations, and if we contract out and there's a situation of an escapee or there's damage to whatever, there's a lot of police calls there, ambulance calls, who is going to be responsible for that? Is that DCF, or is that going to be the entity you contract out to provide the services?
And I think that'll depend on the contract, and it'll depend on the issue when it comes to programming and services. And when I say programming, this time I'm talking about services provided by the vendor and services provided to the youth served there. Those are DCF issues, and some of them, and maybe Eric can speak to how it works with some other programs. Some of them will be handled by DCF and overseen by DCF. Others will be handled by the provider, depending on the issue.
No, that's absolutely correct. It'll depend upon the situation itself.
Speak up so
Oh,
Congress can hear.
it's absolutely correct, depending upon the situation itself, what's happened and what terms we've decided in the contract itself. Some of them may fall to DCF to be responsible for, some may fall to the program itself, and some may be something that'll be a combination of the two. It all depends on what the actual issue is.
Now, so, is that good? That will have to be done then before the facility is put into operation. All of what we just talked about will have to be in that lease agreement or that contract that you have with them. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And you just can't go along day to day and say, oh, well, today you're responsible for that thing, and then something else happens and someone else is responsible. I think that's going to all have to be laid out.
Can I help with this?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, as a provider, former provider, we have, the provider has insurance. So for example, at one point we had a kid who was severely injured in a sledding accident. Our insurance paid for that. It was not, it was an accident, but you have insurance to cover some of those things. If you're asking a crime's committed, etc., it depends on who's at fault and how you deal with that. But generally, the provider is responsible for providing insurance against these things. Now, at one point, we had to go to Lloyd's of London for insurance, but
Well, with all due respect, I think those kinds of questions, I think they need to be answered beforehand.
what?
Well, I think you're right, Topper, and over this coming session, I think it's imperative for the policy committees, both in terms of oversight for DCF and the developing of a program, and if they do go out with a contract with a private provider, there needs to be some oversight there in those committees, as well as the oversight of the construction. So I think we're all on the same page.
So there must be, have you done this before, I guess is the question. Have you had a developer purchase, have the land and build a building and put together the requirements that the state needs and then put that into a lease for purchase going forward?
I can't speak on behalf of building something from scratch. I will tell you it's very common when we go out to lease space that it does not meet the programmatic needs of tenants in the building. So it's very common that when we lease a building, that some amount of fit up or renovation or an addition is required. And that's part of those lease negotiations, and then that gets wrapped into it. So I can give you a good example, great example, actually. The Dill building in Berlin is a perfect example. It was a warehouse many, many years ago. I think they did recycling at that facility. V-Trans had a lab. I was actually in it. That's where I started my career. And they had a lab in Berlin, but it's right next to the river and it floods all the time. And so they knew they needed a home that was high and dry for the lab. And so they found this building, but it was just a shell. It was just a warehouse. That's all it was. And so as part of the lease negotiations, it had to be fit up for a lab. This is one of the most sophisticated labs in the state of Vermont. It has to meet federal requirements. Somebody comes in and audits that building every single year. So that means that the owner of that lab had to put in a substantial amount of money, right, to fit it up for V-Trans to be able to use it as a lab. Subsequently, since then, they've also leased the front part of that building. Governor's using it as his coop space while 109 was being restored. And again, that had to be fit up because it was a warehouse. There was no office there. And so the way that lease agreement works is that, to Madam Chair's point, not only are you paying a regular lease, regular rental payments to rent something, but they're also paying the cost for that initial fit up over the duration of the lease. So you're paying both for kind of just standardly being in a building, plus what it costs the developer, right, to fit up that building to meet the needs, their personal needs to function in that building.
So at some point, the relationship between the contracted service provider and the fit out piece is going to have to come together.
So the provider piece is actually usually is very critical. And so typically when we're doing these kinds of builds, we like the provider to be at the table when we're doing the design because it needs to flow and function for them and the people they serve.
Okay, well, I get, you've answered my question. Thank you.
So we're gonna move this along because we're delayed in terms of the next folks to testify. We'll go on afternoon. So Topper, you still have your hand up. Do you have another question or is that a legacy? Hand.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I don't want to prolong this conversation either, but we're talking about a different kind of occupant in the building. We're not talking about the governor and people like that, the state police or whatever is in the building. What we're talking about is people who have broken the law probably, and they're inhabiting this building, and that's the liability that I'm talking about is they commit another crime. They break out, commit another crime. That's what I was talking about.
Sorry, trying to figure out the schedule.
So I just think that needs to be, I thought it might even be part of the RFP. Because if they don't know what they're getting into, they may not want to build the building.
So I just want to be clear, these are two separate tracks, one RFP for the building, one RFP for the service provider. In an ideal situation, those RFPs would run concurrently so that once we've selected a developer for the facility, we would have a service provider that would then be able to be a part of the design. But they're two separate contracts.
And that's why,
I get it. I'm the builder. I'm building the building. And this other agency's going to come in and provide the services. Am I going to be liable if something negative happens in that community because of somebody that might have occupied that building?
The RFP is very clear about the population that will be housed within the facility. So it's eyes wide open in terms of the type of facility that we're building and the population that it's intended for. That is very clear right up in front of the RFP when you read it. So there's that piece. And then there's also some language in there about any damage that may be, that may occur in the facility and whether or not it's the state of Vermont that pays for that or whether or not it's the developer that pays for that. And the answer is it depends on how that damage is created. So, but those again are all things that you're going to iron out through the lease negotiations.
I'm not interested really in damage to the building. That's not my issue is damage to another human being or another human being's property or something like that. What happens if they maim somebody? If they get out, they escape, and they break into somebody's house and do something to that family? That's the liability I'm talking about. If I'm the builder,
Security.
I'm not gonna want to take on that liability. I can tell you that right now.
So the question is the provider that DCF is contracting out to provide the programming, would they be liable? Or would the state of Vermont be liable? In
Or
this,
building owner.
for who?
I might be a lawyer, but I don't know the answer specifically. I, with quite a bit of certainty can say it's not going to be the building owner.
It's not.
It's going to be the program or the state on the hook for something that goes wrong there.
Because the juvenile that is housed there is under the custody of the state. So I would think the state would ultimately be liable. I would think.
Madam Chair, I think the point is that Commissioner Fitch is trying to make is that anybody who is bidding on this is going to know the population who is going to be there. It's not going to be blind, and that will be up to their own business sense to decide whether or not they want to bid on the project. Is that accurate?
That is very accurate. And again, this is a physically secure facility. So that means designed to be secure,
Yes.
which means it's designed to keep the population inside the building. If there's another means that the population gets out, then I would say that transfers over to DCF.
So I think what Topper is asking are good questions, and I think that begs us as legislators at this coming session, the respective committees, bring DCF back in, bring BGS in to really have some oversight over these next few months as the building is starting to be designed, as the stakeholder group is working, and as DCF is working to find to go out to contract to find a provider to provide those services. It's really going to take some legislative oversight. I'm going to move us along because we're really behind here. And we need to hear from our legal counsel as he's on a tight schedule. He has to be done by 3:00. I know we have some folks with us who want to talk about incarcerated folks being held out of state. So we've got to squeeze this all in a very short period of time. Anything else for the two commissioners and deputy commissioner? Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll have you all back in come January in respective committees.
One other update to make people happy, we also have 3 beds coming online in Wyndham we didn't talk about today, and that is staff secure. That one is also on track, and we are hoping to be able to occupy those up to 3 beds midsummer to early fall.
Okay, great. So I'm going to take liberty and flip the agenda real quick. Ben has to be gone by 3:00. And he wants to quickly go over the letter that we wanted to submit about the home detention program. And Senator Sears and I took a review of this yesterday and said it looks fine. And then if you could quickly just go over it, and then we can.
Yeah, I'll share my screen.
Oh, that works.
To make you the co-host.
Yeah.
But they all have hard copies of it.
Thank you.
Oh, they do?
Yep, there's
Okay, great.
and Senator Sears has it.
Thank you, committee. My name is Ben Novogrodsky from the Office of Legislative Counsel. As requested at the last meeting, before you is a memo to the Senate and House Committees on Judiciary and the House Committee on Corrections and Institutions regarding the home detention review recommendations. So there's some common lead in language in the beginning, but as I'll say, the letter says that during its review, the committee learned that the pathway for an individual to qualify from the program is quite narrow. Further, the committee agrees that there is no evidence justifying the repeal of the program. If anything, the program should be overhauled, expanded, or both. With these concepts in mind, the committee feels a more comprehensive examination needs to be conducted by your committees of jurisdiction before any proposed legislation can be introduced. And then there are some bullets outlining those topics to examine. One is to review the statutory language of 13 VSA 7554, which is commonly known as the bail statute and has conditions of release. It's actually entitled release prior to trial, and the home detention program under 7554B. Specifically, the committee wishes for a holistic review of Vermont's approach to bail and pretrial release with a focus on whether the program should be divorced from bail altogether, whether it should be connected to a bailee's inability to pay, whether eligible offenses should be listed and should include listed and violent crimes, and the proper agency, department, or office to oversee the program and monitor its participants. To partner with CRG to gather historical program data concerning the demographics of the program's participants, including whether they were pretrial detainees or probationers who committed a new crime while maintaining confidentiality, the crimes and crime types of those involved, and the bail amount of those in the program. And then finally, to coordinate with JFO to create an analysis of the program's costs compared to the cost of incarcerating those involved in the program and the cost of passive monitoring compared to active monitoring, including the costs associated with expanding the program to include listed and violent crimes.
So that's what we talked about last time we met. Questions? There is one piece that I missed.
Oh, I may not have sent Peggy the updated version.
No.
Oh, no.
One thing we talked about, I didn't have my notes with me.
Oh.
I was sitting for my car to get worked on. Who supervises besides DOC? Did we?
I feel like that's captured in the first bullet point of the last clause there, the proper agency, department, or office to oversee the program and monitor its participants.
Yeah.
So questions, because we should take a vote on this. Please.
But on the last bullet, I guess the thing I'm just struggling with is, this is maybe just in my head, but, on one hand, I know that we are facing, some issues and discussions about, crimes in Vermont, and on the flip side, asking for work to be done on expanding a program to include listed and violent crimes that keeps people in the community. So I'm just trying to be sensitive to asking people to do. Maybe we need the information to help us inform other decisions that we'll make. I'm sorry. I'm sort of working it out in my head as we go along, I guess. I'm just also sensitive to asking people to do things. To ask people to do work that we may or may not use, I guess. I'm just trying to be sensitive to our Ledge Council and JFO office on that issue, but sorry, you're hearing me, think out loud, which isn't always good.
But this would be for the committees, standing committees.
I understand that. I do understand that. I know it's not, we're making recommendations to them. I get, yeah.
Yeah, I think along those lines, it seems to be whether we're talking listed with violent crimes, it's just a matter of understanding the marginal cost of increasing the availability of the program. And more importantly, for active monitoring. The active monitoring, I think, ties into listed and violent crimes. Because you probably don't want passive monitoring for certain offenses. So those are kind of related, but I think that can all be sorted out in the committees. But I think that it's not necessarily as big of an issue because it's just a matter of finding a marginal cost for additional participants.
Yeah, and we did get some information on the difference between active and passive, because it's, we've stepped back from active and it's at passive, and it was a significant budget reduction to do that. So, okay, all right, thank you for allowing my sort of outside thinking process.
So I'd like to move that we send this letter just presented to us to the committees of jurisdiction as listed.
It's been
The
moved.
letter is dated December 12th, and it is about home detention review recommendations.
Is there a second? Seconded? Further discussion? Ben.
Just one point of information for everybody voting remotely. This will be taking up one of your votes under Joint Resolution 6. So just Representative McFawn, Senator Sears, just so that you're aware that I think one of your three, and I know Senator Sears, we used one last time as well. So should still be in the clear, but I just wanted to notify all of you that are remotely participating.
I think we misread JRS 6. I just read it again today. You have to record any votes taken remotely and as remote votes, and then it's but in terms of the three, thank you for that reminder, Ben, and I'll I don't care. I mean, since it's to the Senate Judiciary Committee, one of the committees receiving it, I don't know that I need to vote on it. I'm going to see it.
Well, I was thinking of just having a voice vote, not to.
There.
It's a vote.
It's a vote.
It's a vote. It's a vote.
It's a vote.
Yeah, if we have to.
I just wanted to
Thank you.
remind everybody, that's all.
I appreciate that, Ben.
And Topper, I don't know how many votes you've had remotely.
Well, that's what I'm trying to find out. I'm trying to
Well, it's only, you only need to be concerned with the ones done in this.
see. Committee anyway, I think I might not vote, just let it go to this committee. Although I support it.
Well, use your best judgment there, Topper.
There we go.
So, been moved and seconded that we send this memo, this letter on to the respective standing committees. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? It has passed. No one voted no. Thank you. We're done with that, right?
For the record, neither
Never done with that.
Representative McMahon or I voted on it.
Okay. Just abstain. Okay, let's finish up here with a discussion about out-of-state incarceration prisoners. I'm not sure whether to start with folks. I think what I'd like to do is, some folks have been on Zoom for quite a while. I'd like to start with them. And we are starting to run out of time. I know, Peggy, you have an absolute stop. 3:25. So let's start with the way it's listed here, Stephen Fenner. And you're on Zoom, so let's keep this discussion going pretty quickly because we are, again, on a time schedule. So Steve, welcome. If you could identify yourself for the record.
Yes, thank you. And we will take exactly 15 minutes. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Stephen Finner. I'm a resident of Barry City. I'm representing the racial justice group of the Unitarian Church of Montpelier. And Senator Sears, my condolences on the death of your wife. I was widowed in 2016, and may your memories be of comfort to you. A number of Vermonters are concerned about our practice of sending prisoners to out-of-state facilities. For some, these concerns are based in religious or ethical values. For others, it is felt that this is not good public policy for a number of reasons, and there are those who question whether there are any real economies in exporting prisoners. You will hear testimony in the next 15 minutes that touches on all of these. Since the witnesses are identified in the agenda, there is no need for me to take up time introducing them, as they will do so themselves. Thank you for your attention and consideration of this issue, and we will go next to Representative Barbara Rachelson.
Welcome, Barbara. It's all yours.
Thank you. So thank you so much. I'm Representative Barbara Rachelson. I represent Chittenden 14, which is part of Burlington. Thank you for the time to discuss this important issue of H326. I have significant concerns about the practice that Vermont has followed since 1998 and continue to rely on of sending our prisoners out of state, especially to for-profit prisons. The expression, where there's a will, there is a way, or even if there's a bill, there's a way, unfortunately does not hold up when it comes to Vermont stopping the practice of doing business with for-profit prisons. I want to acknowledge and recognize that we have significantly reduced the numbers of people we send to out-of-state prisons yearly, but until we draw a bright line and as a state make the decision to stop this practice, it will be a tool that we rely on, and it hurts each prisoner that gets sent away. In 2016, I introduced a bill to ban the practice of using for-profit prisons. Despite the bill not getting taken up, the relevance of the issue continued to be of paramount concern. I have again introduced the same or similar bill with different co-sponsors and numbers in 2018, 2021, and again in 2023. In 2016, understandably, I was told that this was an extremely complicated issue. Vermont greatly relies on for-profit prisons and could not eliminate using them. In 2018, I was told we don't need the bill since we were currently moving our prisoners out of the for-profit GEO prison in Michigan to a government prison in Pennsylvania. In 2021, my bill was not taken up because it felt that the current reforms are working and we just need to give the Department of Corrections more time to eliminate the need. The problem, though, is that if we continue to have the option available, it makes a very convenient tool to keep in the toolbox, a security blanket of sorts. Over and over, we've heard from state officials that this could be our last state contract that we need. Then we end up entering into contracts that are multi-year for more prisoners than we need, have minimums we must pay for, and or at times look less expensive than incarcerating in state. In some cases, the contracts we agree to have worked against the ultimate goal of not sending prisoners out of state. We had a contract with the for-profit GEO group, and we're sending up to 400 prisoners to Michigan to be housed in a prison, which the state had closed in 2011 and were not willing to use for their own prisoners. In fact, I met a former Michigan prisoner at a conference, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I cannot believe you're sending people there." Months later, Department of Corrections learned that the GEO group was not going to renew the contract. Vermont then entered into a 3-year, $21 million contract with the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. In a 2017 article in 7 Days, the article stated Vermont's longstanding goal to reduce its reliance on out-of-state prisons has never seemed more attainable, but a contract DOC signed with Pennsylvania has made that goal all but unreachable. Why? For the first time, Vermont is guaranteeing it will send a minimum number of inmates to an out-of-state prison. Under the terms of the 3-year, $21 million contract, Vermont taxpayers will be on the hook for 250 beds in Pennsylvania, even if the prison population falls and the state doesn't need it. That contract ended prematurely because of significant issues that arose from medical care that prisoners were receiving. So in 2018, Vermont signed a new contract to move inmates to the Tallahatchie prison in Mississippi, run by CoreCivic, one of the largest for-profit prison companies in the nation. In 2021, when I introduced the bill, Vermont had experienced many problems with CoreCivic's facility. 7 Days spelled out those issues and quoted the DOC officials as saying that they lost trust in CoreCivic related to the COVID outbreak. In 2021, the Department of Corrections announced a 1-year renewal of the CoreCivic contract. And the DOC commissioner said, whether this is the last time the state agrees to house inmates outside its borders remains to be seen. It's hard to say right now. In 2015, the commissioner of corrections said that he is optimistic that Vermont will be able to close the out-of-state program by the end of the GEO group agreement, which ended in 2017. Now, in September 2023, DOC has signed a new $21 million 2-year contract to house up to 300 inmates at the Tallahatchie facility. Corrections staff said staffing and space forced the state to house inmates out of the state saying that they do not have adequate space without compromising the safety and well-being of our incarcerated population. It's hard to ignore the safety and well-being issues that our out-of-state prisoners have faced. This fall, it had become known that at least since 2016, DOC has had a contract with the U.S. Marshal Service to hold 60 beds in state prisons for federal use. Beds that could be used to bring about half of the Vermont prisoners housed in CoreCivic's for-profit Mississippi facility back to Vermont. Until we prohibit sending our prisoners out of state, it will continue to happen. We must take this bold step and draw this sharp line. Thank you.
So who goes next? Is it Kathy Fox from UVM?
Yes.
I believe so.
Great.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Fox from UVM. I'm a professor of sociology. I'm testifying today as a subject matter expert in the field of criminology, especially in the study of corrections and reentry upon release. Today, I'm speaking about the impact of visitation on incarcerated individuals. This is of particular relevance to the correctional population that the state of Vermont sends out of state to serve their sentences. So I'm going to be talking about what is known in the research literature. The empirical evidence is clear that maintaining family relationships while an individual is incarcerated contributes to positive outcomes. And I have submitted in the testimony many references of bibliography that cite the studies that report this. So one of the positive outcomes is that it lessens the strain for the incarcerated individual and their family members and increases family function after release. It also reduces infractions and misconduct inside facilities, and it is associated with reduced recidivism upon release. So speaking about the reentry process, since 2000, the evidence base on what works in reentry after a prison term has proliferated. There are numerous findings related to effective reentry, among them things like access to housing and employment, but also social support is chief among those resources that contribute to the success of those released. There's no longer any debate about the importance of family connection in the reentry process. Prisons and jails often make the process of maintaining contact difficult, and extreme distance between family and those incarcerated certainly exacerbates that difficulty. Research also shows, I'll just give you some bulleted points, that prison policies that contribute to the creation and maintenance of social support networks improve after release outcomes. And just a reminder that the vast majority of people are eventually released. Research shows that distance between family and prisons corresponds to less frequent visitation, which is intuitive, but demonstrated. Video calls and visits can be problematic as the technology can be unreliable. It is very expensive, and the visits are not as satisfying or robust. And one very interesting finding is that each unique visitor, family member or community member that an incarcerated individual receives reduces recidivism by 3%, according to Grant Dewey from Minnesota Department of Corrections. And in fact, it's cumulative in the sense of if there's 10 unique visitors, that can reduce recidivism by as much as 30%. Community mentors or volunteers had great impact on recidivism, especially for high-risk incarcerated individuals who lack social support. And as I said, the more distinct visitors, the greater impact. The other family impacts are clear and compelling. Research shows that maintaining family contact has positive effects on the facility's operations, the incarcerated individual's mental health, and the children and families on the outside, both during and after the incarceration period. Prison visitation is demonstrated to assist in reentry as people leaving prison can turn to their family and their friend networks for help with things like housing and employment and support. Visitation's impact on children and families is positive. Having a parent incarcerated is considered an adverse childhood experience that contributes to a range of future problems as children mature. Maintaining family contact with the incarcerated parent can mitigate some of the damage. And in conclusion, family visitation is important for those incarcerated, as well as for their family members who are the hidden victims of incarceration. The societal benefit of visitation in general is great in reducing reoffense rates. And given that the vast majority of those incarcerated will be released eventually, around 95%, even those with very long or life sentences, family connection and community volunteer engagement are important for their well-being and future success. Visitation improves the outcomes for families, and making access to visitation difficult puts some individuals and families at a very distinct disadvantage. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a question here, Kathy.
I have one question, and I don't know whether you'll be able to answer it right now or whether it require additional data or research. How do you control for substance use disorder within the social context, and in particular, a culture of addiction that may have contributed to the individual who is incarcerated and who may be addicted to various substance?
Well, I would say that not every family is a great support for an individual incarcerated or otherwise. And I know that the Department of Corrections, screens for those kinds of relationships, especially for post-release lodging and things like that. So this is based on general statistics, meaning, aggregate statistics, and does not control for things like that. So of course, not all families are a great influence on a person. But generally speaking, the research is clear that in general, family support is important.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
So we go now to Tim Burgess, who's the director of the Citizens United for the Rehabilitation of Parents. Tim, welcome.
Hi, thank you. So thank you for the introduction. I am Timothy Burgess, or Tim is fine. I'm a formerly incarcerated advocate and the director of, as Ms. Emmons said, the chapter of CURE, Vermont. Having been in Vermont correctional facilities, including 2 years at the Lee Adjustment Center, a privately owned facility in Kentucky run by CCA, now called CoreCivic, I'm addressing this H26, which was introduced by Barbara Rachelson. I start with a little history. Joe Patrici, a former commissioner of corrections, wrote in an article in 2020 that Vermont's out-of-state prisoner placement was originally a last resort. While the practice began in 1975 to house maximum security inmates with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, it has become a system that the state now depends on, using the predatory entities such as CoreCivic and entities that contribute nothing but profiteering to our state. In the past 10 years, there have been over 5 pieces of legislation, and I ballpark that, by the way, that seek to end the practice of sending Vermonters out of state for lengthy periods. There have been very few hearings on those proposals. This current bill should be given an opportunity to be considered by the full House and Senate. As Commissioner Patrici so eloquently stated in the 2020 article, sending inmates out of state equates to banishment. In Vermont, when a serious felony is committed and one is sentenced, the state now sends that person over 1,300 miles from the community that was harmed, allowing for no opportunity to repair the harm. The discussion generally revolves around using these alternatives. In reality, the cost to the justice impacted people, the state of Vermont, and recidivism, ends up being costlier. When the state sends people to these facilities with underpaid staff, the impact is seen when Vermonters are exposed to gang-related activity, which is not as prevalent in the state facilities in Vermont. If the direction for Vermont is to not only send those impacted by the justice systems away, but to send Vermont jobs out of state, we as a community may want to consider our focus. Dr. Fox provided you with data on the impact on families and reentry. Part of that discussion that is rarely discussed is economics. Well, it costs approximately, and I'll ballpark in this one too, $50,000 a year for in-state prisoners and about $24,000 for out-of-state to house out-of-state. The time has come to look at all alternatives, not only change in-state costs, but to eliminate the use of out-of-state facilities. This body, the legislature, can not only change the economics, but the way in which we treat those impacted by the justice system, both offenders and victims alike. Finally, with the federal government ending their reliance on for-profit prisons, which they've done under the Biden administration, the question becomes, where will Vermont go? Will we, as a state, be a leader, as Governor Weeks said in 1927, I believe, Vermont will take care of its own? Or shall we continue to take part in a practice that's a proven failure at the federal level? I sincerely hope you'll consider moving this legislation and others like it in the best interest of our state and its residents. So thank you very much.
Hey, Tim. So any question? I know we're starting to dissolve as a committee here.
Sorry, I have to leave, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna apologize.
Any questions? Because we're gonna have DOC come up next, because they do have a document on our webpage. Questions? So Al, why don't you come on up? And there is a document on our committee webpage, DOC as well.
Thank you. I'll try to make this quick since I know everybody wants to get out of here. Thank you. Al Cormier, Chief of Operations for the Department of Corrections. Understanding the testimony that was just provided, Vermont DOC would like to get our population. However, we face many restrictions and challenges in doing so. I think most are familiar with our work towards building a new women's facility and the beds count in that. It's certainly in flux, and a lot of that has to do with the American Correctional Association and their standards and their audit standards around recommendations of 85% vacancy rates within a facility to allow for movement and room for growth and expansion, construction, and so forth. Right now, our total population for males in corrections is 1,232. We're currently, if we were to bring back the 126 individuals that we have out of state, that would put us at 127% capacity in our correctional facilities. Now, we can look at our daily population and we can say that we've reduced our population drastically since the onset of COVID in 2020. I think over 350 individuals that we had let out, 30% of our population at the time. We still have a full facility right now, even if we don't bring back the population with the construction that we have going on. Always with all of our facilities, I mean, our newest facility was built in 2002. So our newest facility is 21 years old.
So Al, I'm looking at, you've got the second bullet, average total male population is 1,232.
Correct.
And 100 and some odd of that 1,232 are housed in out of state.
Correct.
So that brings it down to about 1,100.
Right. I got ahead of myself there on the 127. The 127 is where we are at right now.
Okay,
If we were to bring back the out-of-state population, it would put us in that graph slide of what would be 148, I think was 148%.
yeah, that's, yeah, somewhere I saw that, didn't I?
That is,
But also what I'm looking at is even though we have, without the out-of-state folks, 100 and, how many are out of state right now?
126.
126. So that's basically 1,100 that we have in state. We only have 950 beds available for the 1,100.
yes. So and I can clarify that. So if you, in the long-term housing residential beds, commonly referred to as general population, is where we house the majority of our population. We have temporary housing, specialty beds, which include our booking areas, our infirmaries, our mental health units, the geriatric unit in Springfield is an example of that. Those are units where we have a constantly evolving and moving population. They're not meant for long-term. Restrictive housing is another example of a temporary housing. Somebody gets a disciplinary report. They may end up in restrictive housing for 5 days, 10 days, and then they're out and back in the general population. But those beds are not counted as permanent beds because they're not meant to be permanent beds. The infirmary is not a permanent bed. Our booking area, St. Johnsbury, for example, has 12 booking beds. Our goal is to not keep 12 people in those on a permanent basis. We rotate through, get them in, get them back to general population. So that's where the 950 comes from in our permanent housing, which is what our out-of-state population is. They are in a permanent housing situation currently in Tallahatchie, in a general population unit, not in specialty beds.
I think that's really key for people to understand that your general population beds that are the beds you really need to bring our folks back.
Correct. And that's where we struggle with our population. You'll see in the population on the third slide, Isaac, if you get where we are right now, the pink would put us at our max capacity at 100%. So that's where we're over right now. A lot of this has to do to my earlier point around construction. We have a door project going on right now, replacing the locks and doors and cameras in our facility in Springfield. Every time we have to do a unit to repair those doors and replace, we have to empty that unit. So there's 50 to 60 individuals that are having to be moved to another location, spread out to our 5 other facilities or 4 other facilities. A window project that occurred in St. Johnsbury last year. There was 30 beds taken offline for that window project. Obviously, we've had some plumbing and maintenance in Springfield as well that closed down units. We expect with the deferred maintenance that we have currently on our facilities, this is going to be a long-term problem for us due to the age. And St. Albans is late 60s that it was built. So our facilities are in need of some upgrades, and we're working on that. But that comes at a cost, and that cost is a lack of bed space for our total population.
So maybe you could go into the last slide, which is the challenges.
Mm-hmm. So at my earlier point, we've got an outdated infrastructure. The deferred maintenance on those facilities is something that we work with BGS closely on a regular basis, regular meeting, regular construction projects. Construction, I would say at any time, construction is happening in any of our 6 facilities for whether a minor project or a major project, there is something going on. So those construction projects, they bring the beds offline. We're not able to use those because we can't have incarcerated population in a unit while the construction's happening. We don't have that additional capacity built into our system. We were lucky that corrections was not touched in the latest flood that occurred. But we had a close call with Irene in Marble Valley, which came very close to impacting that facility. So those are things that we have to worry about as well. You know, we are a binary system. We're set up to house two sexes. So when we have a gender nonconforming or non-binary individual, we have to take into account how we house that individual in a specialized unit, which may take other beds offline. That's the same for our juvenile population. When we have to house a juvenile for DCF, we have to shut down a unit. That can be anywhere from 4 to 8 beds, depending on where that individual is housed. So that takes a lot of bed space offline as well. You know, not all beds being general population, as I spoke of earlier, are booking, our mental health unit, infirmary. Those are fluid bed space. They're not counted as a general population bed. So you'll see in our population, we have, you know, a pre-trial detainee list of population of 417 currently. 862 of those individuals are sentenced in our custody right now. Federal detainees, currently 67. That's the U.S. Marshals contract that we talked about. And then 2 individuals currently detained for ICE. And I can add, I know there were some questions that had come up previously and to talk about banning all individuals from going out of state. There's also the Interstate Compact Agreement, the Interstate Corrections Compact Agreement. I believe we have 6 individuals out of state on that right now. Unfortunately, we just had an individual who passed away out of state through the Interstate Compact. Those cases are for an example, somebody comes to Vermont from another state, they commit a crime, they're doing a long sentence. The family component that Ms. Fox talked about, we shipped this individual to Kentucky. He had nothing in Vermont. And that's where he wished to be. And we worked out an agreement with the state of Kentucky through the compact agreement and sent them. So we have 6 individuals that are out of state in that similar situation right now. We have a number of federal detainees that have been sentenced that are in the federal system, but still have a Vermont charge attached to them. There are people that may end up out of state with a Vermont bail. They went to another state, committed a crime. They're currently being held by that state, but the bail that they have imposed by a Vermont court is holding them to bring back to us. So there's, right now we have around 40 individuals that are out of state on one of those different charges or statuses, sorry. But there's a lot that goes into the out of state placement and things that we have to take into account. I would love to say, yes, we're going to bring 126 individuals back next week. It's just that we do not have that capacity to do so.
Trevor.
Just a quick question. On the pretrial state detainees is 417 currently. What would that number look like in 2013?
2013?
Just pick a number.
300. It was closer to 300.
It was a lot lower.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to say that a decade ago, plus or minus years, it would be 20, 30% lower?
Yes. There were, and the sentence was higher.
Yeah. Because we were at one point, we had about 18 to 2,000 people in our system incarcerated,
over
detainees and sentenced. And we were always pushing for our detainee number to be around 300. Sometimes it's a little less, sometimes it's a little more, but it was averaging around 300. This peak has been post-COVID. That's what the detainee population has been increasing post-COVID.
Right.
So it's going to take a while for that to settle out, is what I'm thinking.
Yes.
Senator Searson, question.
Oh, I don't see him.
No, I can't see. Yeah, well, first of all, I believe that our high was about 750 out of state at one point.
Out of state, yes.
Under contracts. But can you speak just to the contract with Core Civic and why it's 300 beds and not 127? I know in Pennsylvania, we had to pay no matter what the number was. But can you just speak to that? The 300 million.
Yeah, so we have had that contract in place for several years now, around that 300 mark, or a buffer. We have no intent of using 350 beds, but in building that contract, we need that buffer there. Should, if Marble Valley was to flood and we had to shut that facility down, where would we wouldn't have 130 beds throughout the facility to place that population. We would look at the out-of-state placement for that. If we had a fire in a correctional facility and they lost their kitchen, we would have to figure out where to place those. So we need that buffer in there as a safety net for us should something happen.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Questions?
I have a quick question. I know everyone wants to go home, so I want to ask a question. The 127 approximately detainees that concurrently have out of state, excluding the cost of building a facility or whatever else, the cost of actually housing those 127 in Vermont compared to housing them, pick your poison here, out of state, what's the comparison on that?
I'd say it's probably about 2/3 the cost.
To house them out of state versus housing them in state? Okay. Thank you.
Irene?
It's intuitive to me that it's desirable to keep people closer to home, closer to family. And yet I got pushback from constituents saying, oh, those people who are out of state often receive training or job skills that we're not able to do in Vermont now. Is there validity to that argument?
I mean, there are minimal programming out of state. That is one of the drawbacks. I will say that the majority of the kitchen staff at the Tallahatchie Correctional Facility is made up of Vermont offenders. So that's the majority of our population is running that kitchen down there for the rest of the facility. So there is some job skills there. Again, not as robust as we would like or would hope to be. But they are all housed together. They're not scattered through the facility with other populations. All of our Vermont population is housed with each other. So there's no mixing of other population. I know there was some mention of gang related activities, but it's all Vermont inmates in that one area.
Thank you.
So Al, I know when we first started doing this, we were really looking at folks that had long sentences, folks that didn't have family nearby, folks that were not involved in programming. Is that still the matrix that you look at?
Yes. Yeah, we have a matrix that we follow for placement out of state. There's a medical clearance component as well. Historically, we've not had anybody on the MAT program out of state. One of the amendments we made to the new contract was to allow for MAT treatment out of state. We currently have 14 individuals that are receiving MAT out of state. So we've been able to bolster that resource for our population. Sorry. The length of sentence, yes, thank you, sorry. So yes, we look at the length of sentence, we look at eligibility for programming. Both that you have those long-term sentences, whether it's 10, 15 to life. Their program eligibility, if they were here, they're taking up a program bed potentially that we can't use. So we look at bringing them back within a year of release to get them into that programming.
And the other thing I have heard, I don't know how true this is, but sometimes some folks who are out of state being housed really feel better being housed out of state than being housed in one of our facilities.
Yes.
Is that true?
That is true. And I know the commissioner has spoken on that previously. He recently visited Tallahatchie and he was told that by a number of individuals, they preferred to stay there. They did not want to come back to Vermont. We have had people that we have brought back for programming that have failed programming for one reason or another and have requested to go back out of state.
And why is that? Do you think they would?
I think it's bigger. It's a bigger facility. It's a bigger living unit compared to, these are 100-bed units where we have 30 to 50 bed units. So you've got more space. It's quieter. It's a newer built facility. So the sound suppression is much better in there. It's not as loud. I think that has a lot to do with it.
Can they smoke down there? Because in the past, they were able to smoke.
Yeah, in the past they were.
We didn't allow that in our
Right. I don't think they do anymore.
Okay. Martin?
So if we were to be able to get our detainee population down to that average that we used to have around 300, what would that do as far as the out-of-state beds?
That would certainly allow us to think seriously about bringing that population back.
And would you be able to then reduce the buffer to some lower number than 350 as well?
In theory, we would be able to, I believe so.
Yeah, I know that we won't get into Dale too much now. We spent some time at our last meeting, but that's, okay, thank you.
That's where the home detention can like help a little. But what you really need are those general population beds. And you also need to look at the security of that particular facility and how crowded you can get it or not.
Because in the past, when our population was higher and we had a higher number out of state, I know we've had 2-person units that had 3 people, and then we referenced the sled beds in the presentation. It's probably like a table of plastic sled is what it looks like that they sleep in. And that's not what we want. We do not want 3 people in a 2-person cell or 2 people in a 1-person cell. And that's what would happen if we brought that population back now.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I just wanted to clarify very quickly, Representative Rachelson's comments about the federal detainee population. So as the chief mentioned, we have about 67 people currently housed for the U.S. Marshals Service. Those are overwhelmingly Vermonters facing trial in Vermont Federal District Court. So eliminating the population would actually send more Vermonters out of state. There are about 180 or so folks facing a federal trial in Vermont. We don't have capacity. U.S. Marshals would love it for us to be able to accommodate all those folks. We were not able to do that through our agreement with the Marshals. So eliminating that population would actually increase the out-of-state population. Just wanted to clarify.
As I said earlier, welcome to the world of corrections. Anything else? Thank you, Al.
All right, thank you.
I want to thank the folks who testified on Zoom. We really appreciate your testimony. This has been an ongoing conversation, and as you can see, there's many layers to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
See
so
you all in a
much.
couple weeks.
So I think that's it for today. Dick, you want to sum anything up before we zoom off?
No, I just want to show my appreciation and let my appreciation for all the members of the committee for putting up with my absence, but hopefully understandable. And look forward to seeing you all in January. And until then, have a very great holiday season.
Well, same to you, Senator, and we look forward to seeing you come January as well.
I'll see some of you next week, I guess.
Seeing at least me, Senator Sears. I think Ben has left, so.
Well,
So let's go off of, let's go off of live. I know Peggy's having her